Sun and sand, sagebrush and tumbleweed, rolling mountains and giant cactus.
Hi, I'm Ann Morton, and this is my piece 31 over 110, which is talking about our 31 consecutive days over 110 degrees. It's made from natural linen, cochineal dye, which is a dye that is from a bug from a cactus. Cactus spikes. It was actually woven with a cactus spike and this found object found in the desert. So it's a map of sorts. It's like a abstract thermometer that just documents our days over 110 degrees.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Lavender, and this piece is called Tiny Push. It's a little different than my work normally is. I'm considering it to be mapping, but it's a vertical mapping of a single spot in my yard. And here we have that spot. I walked back in there, and I dug just a little for the top layer, and then I kept going down. I tried to think about what my relationship is with the Sonoran Desert, and quite frankly, most of my time is spent on my urban yard, where I interact with it, I feed it, I think about it, I try to treat it with the respect that it deserves. And so these jars document probably 30 years of composting, where the soil becomes so soft you can actually just dig through it with your hand. And some of what I think of as my identity is what actually disappears in the composting process. It goes away. So the jars are documenting that, and then also I find a lot of fake plant leaves, and I find that really ironic, and so I have collected those as well in the piece.
So my piece, as I was thinking about Saguaro Land and the Sonoran Desert, I was thinking about just what's happening in this state, how we are a bellwether state for political events that happen all over the country. And I was doing some research from the Human Resource Center's website, and I found all these hate groups. So I just started thinking about how they are invading our state, and how it's just making life kind of unbearable, along with the heat and the weather and the traffic and everything else that happens in Arizona. I don't mean to be gloomy about it, because I'm very positive about this state, but we have to think about the bad things that are happening and try to get rid of them as best we can.
Hi, this is Cindy Dash. My piece is linen and thread, and I'm somewhat obsessed with embroidery work because it's such a tactile experience for me. I'm able to lose my thoughts and think conceptually with my hands while I work on these pieces. So I was inspired by the Sonoran Desert because it shape shifts. So when I thought about mapping it out, and I started by just mapping out what you could find on a map of the Sonoran Desert, and then just started thinking of the fluidity of the borders, of which are really just scars on the landscape. And it was so much fun for me to have this map of a place, and then to think about how borders and lines move like water, and they're fluid. And very much what we find, especially in the Southwest, is that borders can be very fluid.
This work is about the process of mapping, and maps as political constructions in tension with maps as the sort of geological features of the landscape. So in particular, in Arizona, the Colorado River and the importance of water to our desert culture, and also the relationship with the United States and Mexico related to water rights and allocations of water in the Colorado River Basin. The border is sort of mimicked by the parallel line on the ruler, which is sort of commenting on the nature of the political borders versus the geographic borders. The Grand Canyon being obviously at the north end of the Colorado River Basin, and then the Sonoran Desert and the Gulf of Mexico as the sort of southern end of that part of our landscape, and just the critical role that water plays, and then how we also layer into that the aging of our infrastructure, the sort of sun through rusted metal, being evoked, and then the sort of military mapping and history, which is also an incredibly important part of our Arizona landscape. So.
Hi, my name is Jacob Metters, Machupta, Maidu, but I live here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was asked to do this work for this mapping the Sonoran Desert. Out of some work that I've already made, I've kind of selected this piece, thinking about colonialism, thinking about the land and domesticated animals, cowboys, the idea of cowboys and Indians of the West. And I made this print actually off of a quote or lyrics from a Billy Childish song, and it just made me think about just this area and cowboys and cows and Arizona and the cold kind of pushing westward and domesticating the animals, destroying a lot of the land and native people, and pushing native people out and destroying the environment, and kind of going back to this idea of a different mindset and thinking about that. But in a lot of ways, this works also, it's kind of satire and it's tongue-in-cheek and it's fun. So it's kind of, it's got many different kind of layers of thinking and talking about the West, and really for me, history, because I work in print medium a lot, and a lot of that medium, I kind of investigate and critique history and the documentation of that history. So this is kind of, my perspective and direction and concepts kind of bottled up in one piece.
So I make maps a lot for my artwork already, and this piece was kind of a precursor to a bigger project I'm working on, which is where I want to lease a piece of land in Phoenix and kind of allow it to grow however it needs to, kind of like a little bit of a living art laboratory where I would map the plants that grow over the 4 seasons. And it's a lot about just observing the land versus trying to craft the land into something that I want it to be. So I've been doing that already, with my own yard over the past 3 or 4 years since I've moved in there, and just allowing things to mulch and seeing what plants come up and identifying those plants. I found a lot about different kinds of native plants that we really don't think about, how those sort of encourage other plants to grow in the yard. So this map I did it in sections because I was doing it while I was in my yard itself. And I was sitting in the yard and observing what plants are coming up and there are some that I planted there because it's my yard. But seeing what has decayed, and the idea would be once I map it in a different season, that same area would look really different. There's going to be different kinds of, could be invasive weeds, it could be other native plants coming up, could be wildflowers. So it's taking intense observation of what happens in the Sonoran Desert in our yards, in the urban landscape, versus, going out into a mountains, at the White Tanks or, South Mountain or something like that, where we think that's where the desert is, but the desert's everywhere around us, including our yards. And just kind of trying to shift perspectives into thinking of the land that we own or that we take care of in different ways, so that it's not about sort of crafting this beautiful, the beautiful landscape already exists. And if we kind of allow it in. And for this project that I want to do, that hopefully I'll get funding for, it's going to be multi-years, because this kind of process of sort of healing soil and allowing the native landscape to come back in takes a long time, and it's incremental based on what plants take hold and bugs and birds that come in and things like that. So it's sort of an open-ended question of I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm planning on using this kind of mapping, this sort of intense observational mapping, where I'll also include little bits about looking at the content of the soil, working with a soil scientist, botanist, that kind of thing, and And also incorporating like writing as a documentation tool somehow, and that I'm not quite sure about, so I'm still like working on that because I'm not like a professional writer. And then also allowing it to be a space that the public can interact with and come into and like see how it works so that they can feel like welcome to do that sort of thing in their own landscape, or just understand that this is a possibility, that it doesn't have to be like real intense, hands-on, you know, like I've got to put in gravel and I've got to like put in a lawn and I've got to, you know, buy the right landscape elements and that kind of thing, you know, like buy flowers and that sort of thing. It's like sometimes if you just sort of allow nature to take hold and do its own thing, it's a lot more interesting. So so this piece was sort of like a testing out of how I want to do that, like just kind of seeing like what works, what doesn't work. You know, like I discovered a lot of things in my work in general, like when I finally get into it. So a lot of times my pieces are kind of open-ended like that. And yeah, so that's kind of what the piece is about.
So my piece is called Roadmap. It is a 5-panel piece of actual found street signs that are painted with oil paints. So I'm depicting the urban landscape of the valley on this sort of negative space within the street sign. So what I'm utilizing here is like, these are all black and white signs. They're classified as directional signs. So you have like one way, do not enter, do not pass. And I look at these as, you know, for me this is a really special piece because it's a text-based piece, which I don't normally do. And so when you're entering the piece, it says do not enter specifically, and then it directs you to go one way, to not pass, then to go to another way. And well, for me, what it's really about is climate, specifically in the desert. And it really is speaking to my perspective and so many of our perspective in the valley. These are all from the view of the passenger seat, from driving in your car, from my daily commute. And this is the way that I'm seeing, this is the lens I see the valley through every day. And so what I'm looking at here is the effects of infrastructure and what it takes to live in a desert, what it takes for resources, and to utilize these signs and have this sort of white void remain while I'm painting in the fields that are generally black, in this very black and white defined way, creates this really nice ambiguity and almost like you're seeing through them into the landscape beyond.
So my work, this is my saguaro. I was thinking about an ecosystem, and one of the things that I'm known for is the human body. So I wanted a vertical image and centered it just like I would a human body. And then lo and behold, I start to learn that it has anatomy and physiology just like we do. So I started thinking of the whole saguaro and that it's an ecosystem. I include this saguaro actually lives in my neighborhood, and I walk by it every day. One day there was a thrasher, another time there was the Gila woodpecker, and then I actually came across it one day that there was a praying mantis. So everything that was in the environment is actually in the image. And at the base, what I learned about cactus is that they have, I forget what are their roots. They're a root ball. And so I placed the Sonoran Desert into that root ball. And then they have a root system that grows out. So I set that up. Water is a very important aspect to the saguaros, and we have a shortage of it, and they are struggling. So if you look into the root system, you'll also see a heartbeat, because for me, that's what water would be for the saguaro. I love drawing this. It was complicated and textured and fun, and I learned a lot. I love being invited into this exhibit.
I am so happy to be here this evening and participate in this show. The piece that I made for this is really based on the confluence of the rivers here in Arizona, the Gila River, the Salt River, and the Verde. Water policy is an important part of living in Arizona and understanding how important water is for human life. And the piece that I made has a map of the confluence of the rivers, and it wobbles because I think that humans have been less than careful about our resources, and so this piece demonstrates that our carelessness can result in tragedy. But if we work to create some balance, maybe as humans we can improve the environment of our area.
I'm Sarah Hurwitz, and this is my piece, S.A. Hurwitz's Dispensable Directory of Valley Sites Past and Present. When I got the prompt for the show, I love maps and I love lists. So I didn't want to make a super accurate map, but I did want it to be sort of representative of kind of what I would show people if they came to visit me. And sort of like if you were to take someone on an awful tour of every place that has ever meant something to you, I wanted it to be sort of a visual representation of that. So it's got a lot of non-important facts, like where my dad buys his figs, but then also important things like historical sites in Phoenix. And I feel like that's kind of what a lot of my art incorporates. Daily minutia with things that are actually important. And by linking them together, they sort of take on the casualness of one and the importance of the other. My art always involves a lot of lists and multiples, so I think that lends itself really well to a map. And I wanted it to sort of celebrate the valley, but also look at it from a more realistic point of view as well. And again, that kind of gives it the plus and minuses that I was looking for before.
So this piece, I wanted to do a piece that referenced maps, obviously, but that took the viewer closer and closer in and a little more personal with each layer. So it goes from a global aspect to the Sonoran Desert done in beadwork, down to a collage in a patchwork fashion of things from my childhood. So it's all printed on canvas. There's a piece of my grandmother's dress, a shirt I wore in a class photo, the class photo envelope, and some other childhood memorabilia. And then finally it ends with a miniature watercolor that depicts my family home at the base of Paestua. So it's just meant to really swoop you in. It was originally going to hang on a wall, but I found this vintage urn that held it perfectly. So, and it's called You Are Here.
Cactus.